History is filled with men who cannot build, so they destroy. This is not a story about a crime of passion. It is a case study in the architecture of annihilation. We begin in Bushey, Hertfordshire, a place that screams safety. It is the kind of quiet, affluent village where the silence is heavy with comfort. The Hunt family lived here. John Hunt, the voice of BBC Racing, a man whose career was built on describing speed and victory, had built a fortress of peace for his wife Carol and his two daughters, Hannah and Louise. But peace is fragile. It relies on the assumption that the people you let into your life operate by the same moral code as you. This is the first lie we tell ourselves. We believe that civilization protects us from the primal. But on July 9th, 2024, the primal walked up the driveway. At 2:32 p.m., Carol Hunt opened her door. She saw a familiar face. She saw Kyle Clifford, the ex-boyfriend of her daughter Louise. She saw a young man who looked broken, carrying a box of belongings. Her instinct was kindness. She offered him sympathy. She offered him help. She didn't see the 13 days of planning. She didn't see the research, the surveillance, or the butcher knife in his bag. She made the fatal error of projecting her own humanity onto a predator. In that moment, the sanctuary became a trap. The door closed, and the world outside continued to spin, completely unaware that inside, the laws of man had just been suspended. To understand the carnage, you must understand the creature. Kyle Clifford was 26 years old, an ex-soldier, though his service was brief and unremarkable. He worked in security, a job that attracts those who crave authority but lack the discipline to wield it. But his resume is a distraction. The real data points were hidden in the shadows. His brother was already serving a life sentence for murder, a man who ran down teenagers with a car because they annoyed him. Violence was not just an event in this bloodline. It was a language. Kyle was described as immature by colleagues, a man who made degrading comments about women, a man who consumed the digital poison of misogyny to validate his own failures. He dated Louise Hunt for 18 months. To the outside world, he was polite. He sat at their dinner table. He broke bread with the father. He played the role of the suitor perfectly. But the mask creates a vacuum. Behind closed doors, the control began. He dictated her makeup. He policed her friendships. He showed her videos of animal cruelty and laughed when she recoiled. This is the hallmark of the psychopath, the testing of boundaries. He was conditioning her to accept his darkness. He was isolating her, piece by piece, stripping away her autonomy until she was just an extension of his own fragile ego. But Louise woke up. She saw the monster in the mirror, and when she decided to leave, she unknowingly started a countdown clock that only he could hear. There is no fury like a narcissist denied. On June 26th, Louise ended the relationship. It was a mature, gentle breakup. She tried to let him down easy, to protect his feelings even as she liberated herself. She retweeted a quote about the strength it takes to leave. She thought she was free. She was wrong. Kyle's reaction was terrifyingly calm. There was no screaming, no immediate violence. This calm was the most dangerous signal of all. It was the silence before the ambush. While Louise was breathing a sigh of relief, Kyle was engaging in what the military calls target acquisition. He didn't grieve, he plotted. For 13 days, he became a ghost in the machine. He stalked John Hunt's work schedule, learning exactly when the protector would be absent. He studied the family's routines. He bought duct tape. He bought rope. He bought petrol. And then he bought the weapon, a Horizon Cornet MXD 405 compound crossbow. Why a crossbow? Because it is silent. Because it is intimate. Because it is a weapon of hunting, not defense. He wasn't planning a fight. He was planning an execution. He watched videos of violent misogyny to fuel his resolve, programming himself to view these women not as humans, but as targets that needed to be erased. Let's return to that doorway. 2:32 p.m. Carol Hunt lets him in. The camera captures this mundane interaction, the final frame of normalcy before the film burns. 1 minute later, at 2:33 p.m., the violence begins. He didn't just attack, he secured the environment. He stabbed Carol, the matriarch, the first line of defense. And then, He waited. This is the detail that freezes the blood. He didn't flee in a panic. He didn't rush. He waited. For 35 minutes, he stayed in that house with the body of the woman who had just offered him kindness. Outside, the sun was shining. Clients were coming and going from the garden business just yards away. The world was oblivious. This is the terrifying reality of modern isolation. We live in boxes, separated by thin walls and thinner social contracts. A massacre can happen 10 feet away, and you will hear nothing but the wind. At 3:07 p.m., he retrieved the crossbow from his car. He walked back into the house, stepping over the carnage, and reset the trap. He wasn't finished. He was just getting started. He was waiting for Louise. He was waiting to punish the object of his obsession for the crime of saying no. At 4:11 p.m., Louise came home. The doorbell camera recorded a sound that no father should ever hear. 15 minutes of high-pitched screaming. Then, silence. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of captivity. For hours, Kyle Clifford held Louise Hunt prisoner in her own home. He bound her wrists and ankles with the duct tape he had bought days earlier. He subjected her to a cruel and spiteful attack. He raped her. He degraded her. This was not just about killing. This was about dominance. He wanted to demonstrate total power over the woman who had dared to assert her independence. He even used her phone to text her father, "What time are you home?" Think about the sadism required to type that message. He was calculating the timeline of the slaughter. He searched online for how to disconnect smoke detectors, planning to burn the house down to erase his work. He was playing God in a suburban living room, deciding who lived, who died, and how much they would suffer. He was the judge, jury, and executioner, fueled by a deep, pathetic inadequacy that he disguised as power. The final act of this tragedy began at 6:49 p.m. Hannah Hunt, the older sister, arrived. She called her mother's phone. No answer. She walked into the silence. Seconds later, Kyle shot Louise in the back with a crossbow bolt. An execution. He didn't hesitate. He then turned his weapon on Hannah. But Hannah did not cower. She found her voice. She screamed. She fought. Even as the bolt struck her chest, she acted with a clarity that defies fear. She managed to send a text to her boyfriend. "Call police. Kyle here. He's tying us up." And then, she did something extraordinary. Mortally wounded, bleeding from a chest wound caused by a weapon designed to take down large game, she found the bodies of her mother and sister. She realized she was dying, and she called 999. She told the operator who she was. She told them she was shot. She told them her family was dead. She died in the doorway, the phone still connected, the bolt still in her chest. Her final act was not flight, it was a signal flare. Because of her, the police were alerted. Because of her, John Hunt did not walk into the trap later that night. She sacrificed her final breath to save her father. In the face of absolute evil, she was the absolute light. At 6:54 p.m., the architect of this nightmare simply walked away. The CCTV footage from that evening is haunting not because of what it shows, but because of what it hides. We see a man walking to his car with a blanket draped over his arm. To the casual observer, he looks like a neighbor returning a borrowed item. But beneath that fabric lies the crossbow, the instrument of 3 murders. He is calm. He is composed. He does not run. This is the camouflage of the psychopath. They can mimic the rhythms of normalcy, even while soaked in the psychic residue of atrocity. He enters his car and merges into the evening traffic. For the next hour, he is a ghost in the machine, driving alongside commuters going home to their families, completely invisible to the world that is about to hunt him. He drives to Enfield. He stops at a levee. He eventually parks near Lavender Hill Cemetery. There is a dark poetry in his choice of sanctuary. A man who has just extinguished 3 lives seeks refuge among the dead. He enters the cemetery, disappearing into the overgrown shadows of the undergrowth. Meanwhile, the system wakes up. The call from Hannah Hunt has triggered a response that shakes the foundation of the county. The police arrive at Ashland Close to find a scene that defies description. The manhunt begins. But here is the terrifying reality. The gap between the act and the reaction is where the monster escapes. While the sirens were screaming toward Bushey, Kyle Clifford was already settling into the dirt of a graveyard 20 miles away, preparing to wait out the storm. He had transitioned from predator to prey, but he was still armed, and he was still free. When the state realizes it has lost control of the narrative, it responds with overwhelming force. The hunt for Kyle Clifford was not just a police operation, it was a siege. Hertfordshire Constabulary and the Metropolitan Police mobilized an army. Helicopters tore through the night sky, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of God. Armed response units flooded the streets of North London. The quiet suburbs became a war zone of sirens and tension. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, the veil was lifted. Chief Superintendent John Simpson stepped in front of the cameras and spoke the name that was already whispering through the underground: Kyle Clifford. They released his photograph, a face that looked disturbingly ordinary, the face of a man you might pass in the supermarket. But the warning that accompanied the image chilled the blood of the entire nation. Do not approach. They warned the public that he was armed with a crossbow. Let the weight of that sink in. In a country with some of the strictest gun laws in the world, a killer was loose in the capital with a weapon that dates back to the Middle Ages. A weapon that is silent, accurate, and lethal. This detail transformed the fear. It wasn't just a gunman. It was something archaic, something predatory. Every shadow in Enfield became a potential hiding spot. Every rustle in the bushes became the click of a bowstring. For 22 hours, the city held its breath. Schools went into lockdown. Residents locked their doors. The illusion of order had shattered. While the police projected confidence, the reality was stark. A triple murderer was somewhere out there, hidden in the fabric of the city, and he had nothing left to lose. The hunter had become the hunted, but in the hours before his capture, he held the entire city hostage with fear. There is a distinct difference between a warrior and a murderer. A warrior fights for a cause. A murderer fights only for control. And when control is stripped away, the murderer inevitably reveals his true form: a coward. Kyle Clifford did not go down fighting. He did not face the consequences with the arrogance he displayed when binding 3 defenseless women. Instead, he crawled into the Lavender Hill Cemetery and tried to erase himself. He found a dark corner among the graves and attempted to construct a noose. But even in this final act of escape, he failed. The rope snapped. The branch broke. The universe, it seemed, was not ready to let him leave. It demanded he stay to face the wreckage he had created. For 22 hours, he lay in the dirt, shivering, listening to the sirens draw closer. At 6 p.m. the following day, the net closed. Armed officers moved in. The dogs were released. Faced with the reality of men who could fight back, Kyle made one last desperate attempt to seize control of the narrative. He turned the crossbow on himself. He placed the weapon against his own chest and pulled the trigger. It was meant to be the final period at the end of his sentence. But the bolt did not kill him. It pierced his chest, severing his connection to his legs, paralyzing him instantly, but leaving his mind intact. He did not die. He was locked into a living corpse. He was dragged from the bushes, bleeding and broken, denied the easy exit of death. He would not become a myth. He would become a prisoner. The man who sought total dominance over others was now completely dependent on the very system he tried to defy. Death is too easy for some men. The universe denied Kyle Clifford his exit, forcing him to wake up not in the silence of the grave, but in the sterile, beeping purgatory of a hospital room. He was paralyzed from the chest down, a permanent cage made of bone and nerve, a fitting reflection of the trap he built for his victims. The Royal London Hospital became his first cell. Under 24-hour guard, the man who played God was now helpless, kept alive by the very society he had attacked. On July 11th, the formal machinery of justice ground into gear. He was arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of murder. But the true horror was found in the microscopic details. The forensics team didn't just find a killer, they found a monster. The evidence was a scream that could not be silenced. DNA analysis confirmed the darkest aspect of the timeline. He had raped Louise during those hours of captivity. This wasn't just revenge, it was domination in its vilest form. Traces of duct tape adhesive were found on Louise's wrists and ankles, scientific proof of the restraint and torture she endured. He had tried to burn the house down to hide this. He had searched for ways to disable the smoke alarms. He wanted to turn their home into a funeral pyre to incinerate the evidence of his depravity. But he failed. The fire never started. The bodies remained. The tape remained. The DNA remained. Every calculated step he took to erase his crimes only served to etch them deeper into the record. He lay in his hospital bed, broken and exposed, stripped of his weapons and his secrets, facing a mountain of evidence that proved he was not a soldier, but a sadistic coward who preyed on the kindness of women. The courtroom is the final battlefield, and even from his hospital bed, Kyle Clifford attempted to turn justice into a game. On September 17, 2024, his face appeared on the video link at Westminster Magistrates Court. He was pale, broken, and surrounded by machinery, yet the arrogance remained intact. On December 19th, he delivered a shock that gasped through the gallery. Not guilty. Despite the DNA, despite the CCTV, despite the texts, and despite the weapon found next to his own bleeding body, he denied everything. It was a grotesque charade. He was forcing the system to prove what the entire world already knew. It was a final, desperate attempt to exert control over the family he had destroyed, forcing them to prepare for the trauma of a trial. But the mask slipped again. On January 22nd, 2025, the strategy shifted. He admitted to the murders, but he clung to one lie. He denied the rape. Why? Because murder can be framed as passion, as rage, as a soldier's snap. But rape is purely predatory. It strips away any illusion of loss of control and reveals the sadism at the core. He wanted to protect his fragile ego from the label of a sex offender. The trial began on March 3rd, 2025. And here, Kyle Clifford committed his final act of cowardice. He refused to attend. He stayed in his cell, hiding from the eyes of the jury, hiding from the family, hiding from the truth. He let the lawyers speak for him while he cowered in the dark. But the truth does not need the presence of the liar to be heard. It took the jury just 45 minutes to see through the fog. 45 minutes to look at the DNA and the tape and deliver the verdict he tried to outrun. Guilty on all counts. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about the reclamation of voice. Kyle Clifford refused to show his face for sentencing. He hid in his cell, a final act of disrespect, refusing to look into the eyes of the man whose world he had incinerated. But his absence only amplified the power of those who stood in the courtroom. John Hunt stood up, the voice that had commentated on thousands of races, bringing excitement to millions, now spoke with the heavy, crushing weight of grief. He did not speak to the empty dock. He spoke to the soul of the monster. He called him a psychopath. He stripped away any remaining veneer of humanity Clifford might have claimed. He told the court that the screams of hell awaited him. It was a father's curse, delivered with the righteous fury of a man who has lost everything but his dignity. Amy Hunt, the surviving daughter who was not home that day, took the stand. She looked at the empty space where the killer should have been and called him what he truly was, a monster. The judge, Justice Joel Ben Nathan, did not mince words. He described Clifford as a man soaked in self-pity. This is the ultimate diagnosis of the modern malevolent narcissist. It wasn't love that drove him. It was a pathetic, self-absorbed entitlement. The judge sentenced him to 3 whole life orders. This is the rarest and most severe punishment in British law. It means there is no parole, no review, no light at the end of the tunnel. Kyle Clifford will die in a cage. The state effectively buried him alive, sealing the tomb that he had tried to build for others. Kyle Clifford is now a ghost. He is a paralyzed man in a concrete box, destined to rot while the world forgets his name. He sought infamy, but he achieved only irrelevance. His legacy is one of pathetic cowardice, a man who attacked the defenseless and then failed to destroy himself. But there is a light that the darkness cannot swallow. The true legacy of Ashland Close belongs to Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt. They were not just victims. They were warriors in a domestic war they didn't know they were fighting. Carol's final act was kindness. Louise's final act was resistance. Hannah's final act was a sacrifice that saved her father's life. John Hunt asked the world to let Louise's bravery be a shining beacon. We must honor that request, not with passive sympathy, but with active awareness. The lesson of this tragedy is brutal but necessary. The wolf often comes in sheep's clothing. He smiles. He brings gifts. He sits at your table. But the red flags are always there. The control, the jealousy, the entitlement. You, the viewer, are now the keeper of this knowledge. You understand the anatomy of the predator. You see the fragility of safety. Do not let this knowledge sleep. Use it. Protect your tribe. Trust your instincts when the hair stands up on the back of your neck. The world is filled with Cliffords waiting for a door to be opened. Keep yours locked. If you have walked this path with me, if you see the truth hidden in plain sight, leave the signal. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. We are building an order of the awake. Stay dangerous. Stay alert. And never, ever look away.